Good evening. We're going to go ahead and get started and call this meeting to order. We'll start with roll call. Dr. Thomason.
President Reese, members of the board, please let the record show that we have all 5 board members present tonight.
All right, we'll go on to our moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, we'll go on to approval of the agenda. I move that we approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Any questions or comments regarding the agenda? All those in favor? Aye. Motion carries 5-0. We'll go on to consent agenda items. I move that we approve the consent agenda items as presented with the removal of item 3.13.
Support.
Any questions? Mr. Glover?
No, I just, 3.13 is pulled just to clarify some language, and it will be back.
You just looked like you had.
No,
Okay.
I did not.
I do have a question, and it is on 3.7, Mrs. Good, for the amendment for our student suspension. It indicates that the board will receive any suspension notices within 5 days. Do you know, is that 5 business days? Is that 5 days in general? Okay. Okay. And I'm okay with this, but maybe we might want to consider maybe 5 to 10 days. The 5 days is? Okay. Okay. Because I know we get our suspension reports weekly, but sometimes we get them on Tuesday or Wednesday, and if they were suspended the previous Monday, then we would not. That's why I was wondering about that language. Okay. I just wanted to make sure we're good there. And Mr. Thornock, did you see this has been updated per your request for, what was it, the 3.12?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Linda.
Any other questions or comments regarding items on the consent agenda? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion carries 5-0. All right. Now we are on 4.1, our monthly financial report. Anyone have any questions? I know Mr. Holland's not here. These reports are pretty standard and put together very well. I do have a question on one of them, but I will email Mr. Holland. I was just concerned on one of the accounts, one of the cash accounts, it showed a negative balance. So I will email him to get that information and ask him to forward it to you to be put in a superintendent's report.
Sounds good.
Okay, if we don't have any other questions on that, we will go on to our work study presentation, which is our teacher evaluation process.
Madam President,
Mr. Glover.
before that, I know there's no place for board comments, but is there time that we can just thank the administration for this morning's? Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you. I know it's Dr. Thomason and all the members of the cabinet. I'm sure we're here late last night and early this morning to kick off the school year with the teachers, and we were all very, very pleased to be there and see the energy and enthusiasm for this upcoming school year. So a thank you to you guys for all the work putting that together. It was a very uplifting, positive event, and thank you for a great start to the school year.
There was
President
lots
Reese?
of energy for sure.
President Reese, members of the board, I would like to give a whole thanks to Darlene Reach, who planned and put this presentation together this morning, and she deserves the credit for this. She really worked hard and knocked it out of the park for this. So I want to publicly acknowledge that this was her project, and she did an incredible job with that.
Yes, thank you very much. The teachers seemed to really enjoy it. It was a lot of energy in that room. All right, so teacher evaluation process. Ms. Martins?
Good evening, President Reese, members of the board. I'm here tonight to go over a high-level review of our teacher evaluation process, and that's the strong evaluation that we use. I have my wonderful colleagues here, Ms. Karen Bacon, principal of Higley Traditional Academy, Ms. Rachel Broadley, principal at Centennial, and Ms. Sherry Richards, director of elementary ed, to help. Because although I'm familiar with the system, not only have they been here longer and they've worked with it, but they're in the trenches too. So they're here to help answer any questions, and I'll be focusing on the overview that we present. At any point, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Okay. So what we do here at Higley is the strong model in measuring teacher performance. And it's a model of effective teaching, and it's research-based. And it's about collecting data, and you'll hear me refer to artifacts, collecting artifacts in terms of our teachers and what they do to show that they're effective, highly effective, proficient, or not effective within their teaching in terms of the rubric that we offer here. And some of the things that you'll hear is that, and maybe some of the questions that you might have, is that we are actually, I believe the last time I heard, one, if not only the second school district in the state of Arizona that uses this model. So later in the slides, if you had looked at the presentation in advance, we'll talk about how, as part of the strategic plan, this year, this school year, 18-19 school year, we'll be reviewing our evaluation tool with a committee that's going to be made up of teachers as well as administrators to see, does this work, does it not work, what other evaluation tools that are out there, and what should we be looking at in terms of for the next academic year and as we move forward, if there's a better process for us. So in terms of the strong evaluation, it's the foundation of what we do, and looking at their framework in terms of professional responsibility, making sure that they understand their job expectations, as well as trying to clearly define, not only through the rubric, but also through doing the observations as we continue forward and making sure that they know what we believe is effective teaching and it's not effective teaching, and responding to them and giving them feedback. Some of the things that you'll hear later, and you'll hear me kind of jump around, I don't tend to always just go slide by slide, but you'll hear me talk about later that some of the challenges with this too, though, is that through the observation process, there's formal observation as well as there's informal observation. And sometimes getting that information back to the employee, it can be difficult depending on the site and the location and when they're able to give the information. as well as you'll learn, and I'm sure through my colleagues, what they'll share with you is every site does it a little bit different. One thing that I did early on when we were here for professional development in the administrator meetings with the principals is that Sherry, as well as the rest of the administrative team and ed services, had us come together and talk about what do we do that works well when we're giving evaluations and giving feedback, and what doesn't work well, and what are some helpful tools that we utilize to give that quick feedback, because some employees, they need that quick feedback and can't wait to see it in the system later, and depending on how busy the principal or the assistant principal is, how soon can they enter that in terms of our My Learning Plan. You'll hear me refer to MLP, which is a product that is owned by Frontline Education that used to be, I believe, formerly known as Oasis. So that's the product that all of our employees go in and see their evaluation feedback and what they have. So going into the STRONG model, we base it on 7 performance standards. And each one of those standards has numerous indicators in regards to the teacher and their responsibilities and the work that they're doing. And when each standard's met, the evaluator will, to determine, whether each standard is met, the evaluator will observe the teacher in the classroom and determine the performance indicators are evident. And that goes back to, again, some of what I talked about in terms of the artifacts and what they need to provide. And what our principals and assistant principals do is tell the employees that to collect information throughout their teaching year. And we'll talk a little bit about the evaluation timeline a little bit later too. I don't have it in the PowerPoint, but I'll share some kind of major dates in terms of the groups of teachers we have and when their evaluation time periods are. But they're told to collect artifacts and collect evidence of what they're doing in their classroom to then support these standards. And all of our new teachers get this information when they're meeting with their site administration, when they're here and coming back for the 3 days of orientation in advance. The information is also available off of our website. It's on the internal internet, so it's off of the human resources section. So then continuing teachers every year have to also sign this document saying that they understand this process and understand the time frame in which all of this is occurring too. So not only new teachers, but also current teachers get this every year to remind. But as we go through this, the indicators are examples of the types of performance that will occur if the standard's being successfully met. And the indicators are not limited. All the teachers are expected to demonstrate each performance indicator. And we have 7. The 1 through 6 we'll talk a little bit about, and then 7 is an indicator that's evaluated through AZ Merit scores that we receive. I learned it used to be in June, now it's in May in terms of that process. And then all of this is tied, as you know, to the performance pay system, or pay for performance system is what we call it, PFP. I'm going to go straight to the performance standards. So performance standard 1 is professional knowledge. So the teacher demonstrates an understanding of the curriculum, subject content, and the developmental needs of the students by providing relevant learning experiences. Standard 2 is instructional planning, and that's where the teacher plans using the state standards and the district curriculum, effective strategies, resources, and data to meet the needs of all of our students.
Ms. Martins, can I ask a question while we're
Yeah.
right here? On professional knowledge, how do we handle CTE classes where there's industry knowledge that perhaps the principal or assistant principal does not understand? They have content knowledge that the principal or assistant principal wouldn't understand.
That's a good question. I'm actually going to look back at Dr. Mallerwine and see, since CTE falls underneath his area, if he
And
can help.
President Reese, members of the board, I do know the answer to that question is that there are a set of standards put out by the state for different CTT certification areas, and then those certification areas are what's evaluated on the teacher evaluation performance. And so there's a set of standards for each different area within the CTE programs that teachers can be evaluated on.
But if they don't understand the curriculum that they're teaching, the evaluator doesn't understand the curriculum that they're teaching or the industry standards that they're teaching. I get for CTE, we have state standards, but if if the evaluator doesn't understand that, how are they evaluating them on professional knowledge?
We still have performance indicators given through standardized testing, and then we can measure student success rates through that. I mean, just like many of our administrators may not know, the higher math levels, calculus and differentiated instruction for differentials and math things, there's a very high levels of math, but we can still evaluate good teaching in the classroom and take a look at student scores through standardized testing opportunities.
But what if it's digital photography?
The students still have to meet a set of standards, and those standards are still based on criteria and tests that they're given from CTE programs and those areas.
No, I understand. My concern is the evaluators don't perhaps know, they can look at the standard, but they may not understand them. They may not understand the industry standards. They may not, and so we have an evaluator evaluating. I get for math and there's tests, but how do you know if they're being effective teaching sports med or being effective teaching
Ms.
digital
Broadley.
photography?
Sure, I want to maybe talk about band. That's my experiences. I don't know anything about band. I don't know anything about orchestra. But to evaluate my band instructor's professional knowledge, I look at his results that he does with the students. If our students are struggling to meet the standards or the requirements that are outlined for their particular program or their particular coursework, that helps me to determine if he knows what he's doing or he's not. We also have a lot of conversations with our teachers as well, formally and informally. I learn from my teachers. They teach me, different things, and so that kind of gives us a little bit of insight as well. We can also pull in things with professional knowledge. There's multiple performance indicators, which I believe Mom will get into, that kind of go under professional knowledge to give us a glimpse of what that could look like in addition to what's just laid out there. It could also be that they're continuing education, which also kind of trickles into another standard later on. So there's other things that we can use to help us with that. But this could also be a limitation of our evaluation system as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
As Ms. Broadley mentioned, I think as I reflect on her answer, like she said, it could be another limitation, and it could be as we're pulling this committee together that's made up of teachers and administration, that we're making sure that we get a CTE instructor on there so we can hear from their perspective what's been happening and how it's been flowing in the classroom, and if there have been challenges and what those challenges are in that bigger picture. No, thank you. So the next two standards are standards 3 and 4, which is instructional delivery, where the teacher effectively engages students in learning by using a variety of instructional strategies in order to meet individual learning needs. And performance standard 4 is assessment of and for student learning. So the teacher systematically gathers, analyzes, and uses relevant data to measure student academic progress, guide instructional content and delivery methods, and provide timely and specific feedback to both students and parents throughout the school year. Our next standard is learning environment, standard 5, and that's where the teacher uses resources, routines, and procedures to provide a respectful, positive, safe, student-centered environment that's conducive to learning. Standard 6 and standard 7, professionalism. The teacher is maintaining a commitment to the professional ethics, communicates effectively, and takes responsibility for and participates in professional growth and development that results in enhanced student learning. And then standard 7, I mentioned earlier in terms of student academic progress, this is where we measure based on the district scores that we get based on site that had previously been given to us in June or July, and now we receive in May. And that's where the teacher's results is defined, measurable, and appropriate to student academic progress. What you'll hear us talk a little bit about later and some of the challenges with this, though, is so part of this system weighs each one of these standards, and there's points that are given, whether you weigh in on highly effective, partially effective, and ineffective. And what can happen, and it's been a challenge that I have heard since my arrival here, is that you might have a highly effective teacher, and they might rate standards 1 through 7 and that highly effective, But then when you get to standard 7, which is measured on the data, and it's measured based on site and district, and they just say, for example, they just get an effective, sometimes then that could weigh down that teacher, and instead of being scored at highly effective, they can be scored at effective, and just the way the points work out. So those are some of the other challenges that I've heard personally from teachers that are concerned, as well as I've heard concerns from administration and how, that really impacts a positive teacher who's doing a great job, but it also does the reverse. It could impact a teacher who maybe isn't doing so great of a job, but that effective score at the end could shoot them in the other direction. So there's certainly some challenges and limitations, and certainly nothing's perfect, but we want to make sure we're doing what's best for Higley in the bigger picture. So with the evaluation process, administrators are responsible for evaluating the teachers. All administrators who are responsible for evaluating teachers are trained on the system and are considered qualified evaluators. And that it happened early August last year. And we have 2 administrators this year that are new to administrative roles that previously were teachers that will be going through the training this year. And Ms. Karen Bacon and Ms. Broadley have been doing the training, which I appreciate, because I know when I got here last August, it was just a whirlwind, and much of it is still a blur. So if you ask me about some things that happened from November or August to November, I might remember. And so I know in this process, I was very appreciative of them sitting down and talking to me through this again. And it connected as we were doing evaluations and we were coming up with the summatives this year that happened in May. And it was a little bit of a delay because of what had happened earlier in April, pulling all of this together and making sure that everybody understood and needed to get the work done and see where people fell. Because it impacts them greatly whenever you tie money to something. It's a big impact to the employee, so we want to make sure that we're doing it right and we're doing it as equitable as possible, too.
Ms. Martins, can we kind of talk about the training?
Absolutely.
What type of training do we do besides the tool? Because someone's an administrator does not mean they know how to evaluate people. Because you go through and read and explain the indicators does not mean they know how to evaluate people. So when we have administrators that are brand new administrators, not just to Higley, what type of professional training do they get outside of, here's the tool, how we use it?
Sure. So I'll comment a little bit, and then I'll have my colleagues add to it if necessary. So to get your administrator cert, you'll go through some of this in terms of the courses to get that certification to begin with. So there's an understanding that there are some things that are covered through that process as step 1 in the classes and the practicum that they do when they're doing kind of their internship with the site to kind of learn and piggyback on this. Additionally, as I shared earlier, my colleagues do this training, and they do it in the beginning of the year and help them understand how it ties to Higley. So here's the larger picture. How does it tie to Higley? Something that I know, again, Ed Services does through their monthly professional development is different times throughout that they've kind of collected and come together and focused on whether it's been the elementary education or it's been the secondary education or all of them together, focused on sharing their tools and the techniques and their stories and how this has been effective and how it's worked, as well as ADE also is doing training, and we have participated in sending our administrators to these trainings. They're quite comprehensive. 6 days total, Sherry? 5 days total. And we have sent, I think we've sent 8 to 10 already, and we're set to schedule in August to send another 6 of us. 8? Okay, 9, including me, 9 people. So we're always trying to think of and making sure that we're developing our individuals. And we've got some people who are like, this year's their second year as an administrator within the district that we'll be sending. We were very fortunate that we got a discount, so we're able to send more people this year. AD's worked with us because we've kind of been I'm going to use the term loyal partner with them in this process. So we're excited about that in the bigger picture. And, we've talked about other ways of what we can do to kind of help our employees through this too in the bigger picture, whether we maybe in the future try to bring training here to the district and being able to offer it to all of them as a collective group all at once, and then again, feed off of one another in terms of what they're learning, et cetera. So that's something to look into the future too, as a potential possibility in a partnership if that works. So anything else you think?
I was just going to say our training that we do is pretty much an overview, but the ongoing professional development that happens throughout the year, the inter-rater reliability between the 2 administrators or 4 administrators on the campus, as well as we have practiced extensively giving feedback and what that looks like, how the employee interprets that feedback to in fact change. We have partnered up in administrative groups and done walkthroughs through classrooms at other schools so that we can have dialogue about what kind of feedback would be given based on the observations that we've made collectively. We've practiced sharing just immediate feedback tools, walkthrough, because that is really the most impactful for instruction, is that immediate response, immediate feedback. Coaching, in and out coaching, where we'll go in and give feedback while someone takes over the class. We work with our literacy coaches on our campuses to work with that too. But the training that happens at the beginning of the year is really an overview. I think you touched on it. Part of our administrative preparation process is just that. How do you lead for change? And those administrative opportunities when you're doing your internship are powerful for that learning.
Is there any, you said you do reliability testing and
Yep.
sharing?
We call it inter-rater reliability. So one thing that Rachel and I have built into the training is we have some video clips. And that's exactly how James Strong came in and trained us. He provided us with video clips of classroom lessons or snippets of them and asked us for specific indicators and what to look for. And then we practiced the dialogue of what that would look like, having a meeting with teachers. Not only that observation is important, but more importantly, in my opinion, are the conversations that happen with teachers outside of that process, both before you go in to observe and then after, because there's always a story. There's something that happened in that classroom before you ever got there that you didn't get to see, and there's something that happens for follow-up. So those ongoing conversations are the most impactful for the observation. Most of those indicators on that tool, you don't see in that lesson. You just know because of working with the people, so.
Yeah, one of the comments we'll probably make later, although I don't think I put it directly on the side, but it's in my notes. Karen had provided this article that was done just in 2017, so not that long ago, for a school district, I think in New Jersey, if I remember correctly, very similar demographics to us, and they'd been using the Strong model for 5 years. So an individual part of their dissertation was to go and evaluate and find out, how is this working? How has this grown? How has this improved teachers? And some of the challenges that I have heard from my colleagues in terms of this process came up in this article, and it talked about subjectivity and how there's a lot of that. And so you had teachers who had been here, 3+ years, and when you evaluate them based on what's listed in the rubric, there's talk and discussion about what you know of them and how it's beyond just the facts. Right or wrong, I'm not quite sure, but it's certainly a challenge in the bigger perspective if you're told you can only do this. I don't think the reality is it matches that. It doesn't match just the facts, just the artifacts, or what they show you as support details as the artifacts. I think it's hard not to have some of those other factors play a part in it.
Just one last question on
Oh,
it.
sure.
Sorry. Then, when we have new administrators, say we have a new assistant principal, is the principal going in and evaluating with the assistant principal and then discussing what they saw just to kind of make sure? And then, how much do we do that?
So I'll talk a little bit about what I did when I brought on my AP. So we do walkthroughs together, again, to work on the inter-rater reliability to make sure that we're both seeing the same thing, giving similar feedback, seeing things from the same lens. That was really important for us because I want to make sure that Matt and I are a cohesive team. We've done evaluations together, even the first few we've done together. And I sat down, like I would lead one, he would observe. We would do one together, and then that gradual release of responsibility, and then he would do one on his own while I sat back and just observed and provided feedback to him. So I know other admin teams do the same thing. They do the coaching with their AP and provide those opportunities. But even still, Matt and I on our calendars, we still have where we will still go in like once a week and go observe together, just so we're on the same page. And that's literally the only purpose for it, is so that him and I can make sure we're continuing to be on the same page.
So when Mr. Bickle joined me, we did similar things, but we would go in and I would say, okay, I'm going to write my feedback, you're going to write your feedback, and then we're going to compare them, because I might get swayed by what he's going to say or vice versa. So it was quite interesting. And, you know, Karen and I used to do this because Karen and I work together, and I think it just makes us all better. And that's one reason why the elementary principals did team of 3 walkthroughs this year. And I think it was a good experience because they learned from each other.
So is that just a practice, or is there an expectation there?
Well, it was an expectation this year. One of the main focuses from the Ed Services Department was to focus on deliberate practice and specific feedback. So we actually modeled and practiced that in our admin meetings, and then challenged the principals to go back and take the training to their campuses.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah. And as Karen said earlier, and Sherry indicated, there are a lot of activities both in their professional development and the training that they give, the overview for the new administrators, as well as what they did to their professional development, that were activities that did have them work on their own, view a video or a scenario where they got sample evaluations and talk about what's wrong, what's not wrong, and come together as a team and utilize each other. So trying to go back in the bigger picture. So I do understand your concern. One thing that I've noticed since I've been here, and I don't think it's right or wrong, it's just interesting, is that, you know, we say we have 15 schools, 13 sites, and there's a lot of autonomy at each one of those sites. And so there are things that operate very differently, but I know that we're moving in a direction in a culture to where there's more consistency and guidelines and practices at, you know, for the higher level, X, Y, and Z is always going to be the same here. And then there's other components within that then could alter or change a little bit as a result. So part of the evaluation process consists of the formal observations, informal observations, and then the summative. And I think I indicated this earlier, so I might be repetitive here, but that summative, and one of the challenges is that sometimes throughout the process and the timeline of these teacher evaluations, if they don't get that summative till the end, they might not know. They might have gotten some general feedback from the informal or some feedback through what was inputted afterwards, but all of it together doesn't get seen until that summative is done. And that certainly is a challenge where you think as an instructor you might have been doing well for the academic year, and then you get to that summative part, and when you really look at the numbers and everything that pulls together, it's maybe not what you expected. So that's certainly a concern of ours too. So
Mom, can I say something really quick? I'm sorry, I just want to say, I don't think it's so much that they don't know where they, like, you know, they do get that feedback. The thing that I guess blindsides teachers sometimes is they don't know about the rating that they get, if they're going to be effective, highly effective, ineffective, and that's the challenge, because there's nothing along the way throughout the year after the feedback we provide them, whether it be formally documented in MLP, or if it's informally, or even just, you know, it's not formally documented in MLP, but we do like emails or memos of direction or whatever it may be. They don't know what their rating is. So that's definitely a challenge. So they do receive the feedback frequently throughout the year. It's more of that rating at the end. And so they don't find out where they stand, because everybody wants to go in being highly effective. So when they get effective, it's like, oh, it hurts. And they, you know, and we all want everybody to be effective, and highly effective would be fantastic. So that's definitely the biggest challenge with regard. Because the rubric, they don't get to, we don't put in the rubric values until the very end for summative.
thank you, Rachel, for clarifying that. Yeah. So this year, in terms of the timeline, so we have something that Ed Services did before my arrival last year. I think some of it has to do with some of the state legislation, is we've broken up our teachers into two groups. We have Group 1 teachers and Group 2 teachers. Our Group 1 teachers are teachers with 3 or less years of in HUSD, so they're required to have a minimum of 2 formal and informal observations. And the first formal observation will be announced, and the second one's supposed to be unannounced. Our Group 2 teachers are teachers who've been with Higley for more than 3 years and have been rated effective or better in all areas and are required to have a minimum of 1 formal observation and 2 informal observations, and that formal observation will be announced. So based on the grouping and the timeline for the academic year, if they are supposed to get 2 observations, one should be done by November 2nd, and then one by April 22nd, according to our timeline that we've given to our administration in the process, as well as informed our teachers. They're very much aware of the timeline, just as the administrators. So if something's not happening, hopefully they'll bring it to the attention of somebody. And the formal evaluations, and some of this again is based on state legislation, should be a complete lesson, not less than 30 minutes, and the 2 formal observations must be 60 calendar days apart. And there's some other components within that state legislation that falls in there too.
A question on that.
Yeah.
The 2 formal observations, are they done by different people?
So I've done it a couple different ways in my tenure here in Higley. How we do it now to provide a more comprehensive view of what this individual looks like in the classroom. And again, I think each administrator probably does it. Each administrative team may do it a little bit differently. And I can't speak at secondary, but I know a lot of us in the elementary level will do, our AP will do one, and then the principal will do another one, and then again we'll split up those formally documented informal as well, and then convene together to do the summative, so that it's giving a really well-rounded picture.
Well, and that can help with some of the subjectivity of it when, if they say, well, my principal doesn't like me. Well, your principal was one, your AP was another, so that way there's multiple views. And I guess the only one I would have a concern is if you're way off, then I think as an AP and a principal, then you kind of need to come together and figure it out. But I think having those 2 viewpoints are important, that it does help remove some of that. And then, like you said, you have more of a well-rounded view of the teacher.
We've done the same thing at my school this year, and the teachers really liked it. Another thing is it's a minimum of 2. We can always do more and invite a coach from the district office or, the curriculum director to come out and also help us do those as well if we feel that we need further assistance.
All right, so, sorry.
No, that's fine.
Well, I'm glad I didn't see the Group 1 and Group 2 in the slideshow, so I was hoping that if that wasn't happening, that some of the burden could be lifted. I mean, you principals know who the good teachers are, and usually don't have to spend as much time, and there's certainly people that need more time dedicated to them, so that's good. Just the April date, I guess one thing, and maybe it's neither here nor there, but when we offer contracts to people before the evaluations are done, something to consider might be getting them done before we offer the contracts for whatever that's worth. Because, I mean, I think you know who's in trouble anyway along the way, but it might be nice if we could figure out a way to wrap that up before contracts are offered. That's my humble opinion.
No, understandably. I mean, similar to the certified individuals, our evaluation timeline for our classified don't quite match up when we give out contracts. And my understanding is that at one point it might have, but over the years with all the competition within the area, people are eager to get those contracts out a little bit sooner. But I personally have struggled with that myself. But I will say that, and I think I've communicated this to my colleagues, is that, these things shouldn't be surprises to individuals, right? Going back to your point, Mr. Glover, that there should be comments, conversations, discussions along the way. And as Ms. Bacon said, it's a minimum of 2, but it doesn't mean we're not doing more. And if there are concerns, I'm sure we are. I can speak towards a situation this past year too, where when I was involved, it got back to me that there was a teacher who was concerned about biases with one particular administrator. So I worked with that administrator and said, what's the harm in having the other person do the evaluation, right? Especially if there's consistency in that voice and that message, then hopefully it'll show to them that, there isn't any bias. This is just happens to be what we're documenting and what we're seeing and what's happening. And so then let's talk about the larger conversation about then how do we move forward and make sure that we're doing better for our students in our community, et cetera. Absolutely. So I talked a little bit about this earlier, but so after each formal observation, the evaluator is required to give that written feedback and then hold the face-to-face post-observation conference within 10 business days. And again, you'll notice that a lot of this, again, aligns with the state statute in regards to teacher evaluation systems. So then, in addition to that, we talk about how, we're not going to do those and conduct them within 2 days of fall, winter, or spring break because that's not equitable in the larger picture too, and making sure when those are done. Those informal observations or walkthroughs can be conducted at any point by the evaluators. 2 informal observations must be documented in OASIS, what we also refer to as My Learning Plan. And the other informal observation may be conducted and documented on the evaluator's internal document. And that's where, as we talked about earlier briefly, some of the different sites have different tools that they use to give that feedback, whether it's immediate feedback or more information that they could have through that informal process. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that. I know we had at one of the professional development things, all the sites bring that. And I don't know if something more came out of that or not.
I think they just got to learn from each other. And what I saw happen was, oh, I really like the tool you're using. I'm going to try it out. What's important about these for me is to get them the feedback as soon as possible, because all of us want to know if we're on the right track or not. So I think it was interesting for us to see each other's tools, test them out, but keep doing more than the minimum.
And so then after the second formal evaluation, we have the summative performance report. And a minimum of the 2 informal observations, the evaluator should complete the summative report after doing all of that. And on that summative evaluation, the evaluators will give his or her rating on the teacher in that standards 1 through 6. And I'm glad Ms. Broadley brought up earlier, that's where then the scores and the numbers come in that bigger picture and where they get that actual rating. So standard 7 is reported on a separate form, and again, because that ties in with state data. The ratings for standards 1 through 7 are totaled for a single overall rating, and that comes in later once, and Human Resources actually inputs all the standard 7 data that comes through that we get through the Office of Research. They let us know what we should be rating for the district. And one thing that Sherry and I have talked about in terms of moving forward is that I think 2 or 3 years ago, the district shifted to doing kind of an overall 1 rating than what it had previously. Should we reevaluate that this next year to where then that rating is more site-based or looking more in terms of the individual teacher and their data that we get from the state? So then that way we're rating them through their individual performance and not the site performance overall and the district performance overall. So that's going to be one of the things that we'll have to discuss too. Does that make sense? Okay.
So that actually happened when we transitioned from Ames to AZ Merit, because previously we did have teachers in the B group, like music teachers, art teachers, setting goals, and we were evaluating through data whether they were making it. But then when AZ Merit came along, we had that gap where we didn't get letter grades, and we couldn't figure out how are you going to be fair about this. And so we're transitioning to be more objective now that we have data and it's coming out in a timely manner.
Thank you. So once that summative report for standards 1 through 6 is completed by the evaluator, there is a face-to-face meeting that's held to discuss the final ratings. So they have that information. And again, as Ms. Broadley communicated earlier, that's where then some of those teachers not seeing what that actual number is and where it puts them is heartbreaking at times in that bigger picture. So something we want to look at. And it is hard. And some of the numbers, I'll openly admit, as I was looking through the numbers, it was hard for me to identify, too, how those numbers then correlated with the numbers that we have that we send out to our administrators in regards to then what makes them eligible for that pay for performance. So it took me a little bit to understand that process, too. So I think there's a disconnect there in that bigger picture. And the summative evaluation conference may be combined with the post-observation conference for the second formal observation, or it may be separate. It depends on the timeline, it depends on what's happening, the site, and so forth. So you've heard our limitations as we have gone through in our challenges. You know, I've noted some of them already in regards to the concern about not knowing where they actually fall in terms of their score, the subjectivity of it. But there are other limitations in regards to the fact that you're only observing 3 to 4 classes per teacher per year. So when you really look at that in the larger picture, but it's hard when you have 40 teachers and you're 2 administrators and you're trying to get to everybody. So there's that dynamic that plays in that too. You're looking at classroom responsibilities only. You're focusing on the process of teaching versus outcomes. And it's that inspector model of evaluation, right? And it is hard because they can't be in the classroom every day and every teacher to kind of see the consistency in that performance in the bigger picture. So earlier I mentioned, and I wanted to make sure to reiterate, because I'm sure this is going to tie into potentially questions that you have or maybe concerns that you have, identified prior to my arrival in terms of the strategic plan and developing that. And one of the concerns that came out of it was really to evaluate the evaluations, not only the certified ones, which we're focusing on today, but also the classified evaluation system too. Because when you look at the classified evaluation, I personally think it's an interesting tool. And it's hard to measure, especially because it's one evaluation for a wide variety of classified employees too, in that bigger picture. So we're going to spend this year putting together, and we've already brought it up in cabinet, identifying not only administrators but teachers, and certainly seeking recommendations from HEA in terms of teachers to be on that committee and get together and start our work early to kind of probably lower level of what the Ed Services does for adoptions for new curriculum. But what do we do now? What are the challenges? What have you heard? What's out there, finding out what's out there, understanding what's out there, learning about them, and then deciding what's best. Because just in this preliminary review and getting ready for today, my colleagues shared, we've got districts that are using Danielson, we have districts that are using, what's the other popular? Marzano, and then we have districts who've made up their own that are kind of a combination, or if you put it together, look like maybe the Danielson/Mazzano model in that bigger picture. So we have to figure out what's best for us, and there's a cost to all of this too. I did neglect to bring that with me today, but Chuck might remember, because I know he sent me some data a few months ago in regards to the larger plan. So in between what we pay to house the evaluation system on Frontline, the evaluation system itself, and the components of that, I think it was just under $30,000. Chuck, do you remember? You may not remember. Including ASOP, it was 55. So that's certainly an impact to that too, to have the licensing to do that and what that means for us and what's budgeted. So the last slide is additional questions that you might have.
I just have one other question. Sorry. Goodness. Have we ever had teachers evaluate themselves? Do you give them the tool and say, here, evaluate yourself, and I'll be in and I'll evaluate you as well, and then we'll talk about it?
Sure. So It's difficult to give the rating of highly effective, effective based on one classroom observation because there's more to that. So the summative, yes, and I actually learned from Karen, and during these discussions we've had at our admin meetings, to give teachers, an outline of the standard in the rubric. So what equates a 4, what equates a 3, and so on, and have them reflect on that and bring it to our summative to go through. And, I asked the teachers, where did you rate yourself here? Why? What additional artifacts do you have that would support that? Here's the documentation that I provided you throughout the school year, and this is where you're ultimately being placed, according to the rubric.
I do it in service with my staff at the beginning of the year and also walk them through those indicators and what it looks like and what it doesn't look like, and have them reflect on their instructional practice and give examples of what that looks like in their classroom. So they have a notebook. It's like an interactive notebook of ongoing reflection, so that they can consider that when they're planning their lessons, to make sure that they deliberately, intentionally plan for that.
I do know in conversation with another site administrator, that site does, they call them mid-year personal reflections. So they invite them in to reflect on how this year has gone and what's gone well, what's not gone well, and to bring those comments with them to that meeting. And then if there's an issue to address or discuss, sometimes they'll bring that up and talk about how the next term as we start can be better, how do we improve, or what do we do to make sure we end out the school year great. So there's a little variety within the district there too.
Well, I think having the teachers, one, obviously they need to understand the tool, how they're being evaluated. But I think when, like you said, they reflect and they kind of reflect on their own practice and they're reading it, when they have an opportunity to do that, and it's really powerful. And sometimes they'll come and be like, oh, I'm doing a great job here, here, and here, and this is why. And maybe it's opposite of the evaluators, and they're going to be like, okay, I understand that, but this is what I see. And when you compare, then a lot of times that's very eye-opening and powerful, that can help lead the change that may need to happen.
It's really interesting because the teachers that are probably my superstars on my campus were the ones that had the most difficulty self-evaluating. They're highly reflective, but they had the hardest time putting it down on paper.
And they're probably harder on themselves. Like, well, I did this. Okay, well, that's okay, So, but I think it does make it hard, and it is difficult for them, but I think that is very powerful for someone to take a step back and look at how they're performing, because sometimes, especially when we're doing things for a long period of time, it's kind of that autopilot that just happens, and each year we teach the same lesson over and over and maybe modify it a little bit, but if someone didn't see a piece of that, then it gives them a chance to reflect on that. So, right, who's next?
Can I just, I do have some couple of questions as we were going through this. In reference to deciding on this process, in reference to your committee, was there any teachers on this committee?
We will be identifying teachers. Yes, we haven't put the committee together yet. We just, with the new year starting, it's been a bit hectic. But we did bring it up in cabinet, and as a cabinet, we talked about how we will get some recommendations from HEA, get some recommendations from our various administrators, but it'll be made up of administrators and teachers for sure, yes.
Sure. One question I know President Reese brought up in reference to the training, who's taking a look at the people who are the observation, okay? Because I hear quite often, who's evaluating them? Because like you mentioned that one teacher came to you, I hear out in the community at the beginning of every year, the teachers go, wow, I'm glad so-and-so's reviewing me this year versus so-and-so. I hear that, okay? So my question is, there is bias out here, and hopefully with this new implementation, that won't take effect, but who is taking a look at the observer to say, hey, you know what? you don't put any exceeds. You're always putting, you know, average on the recommendation. Where are we going at? I mean, at which point, who steps in here to say, maybe we need some more training with this individual in reference to that? So do we have a plan for those type of things?
Certainly. Well, I'll answer it, and
Okay.
or to what I think, and then I'll let Sherry and anybody else add to it. But some of the ownership and accountability is then the evaluations that are done of the principals and the assistant principals, right? In regards to, are they they have a similar evaluation, and the principals and assistant principals that go through My Learning Plan also. And part of that is their evaluation of their employees and their teachers on their campuses. I will say, I lost my train of thought. I apologize. I had something else to add. Maybe it'll trigger with that. I don't know, Sherry, if or anybody else has something else to add.
So one thing that was really eye-opening for me a few years back is looking at our data, and it was like just put on blast for everybody. So you would see how many teachers at Centennial compared to the district were rated highly effective, effective, ineffective, partially effective, and then you look at either your overall letter grade or just your school data, and how does that correlate? So you have you would have schools that had a ton of highly effective teachers as rating, but your scores didn't match up. And that was like, it's embarrassing. I mean, I felt it. I was like, oh, so I need to relook at how I'm evaluating people because maybe I'm being too lenient, and maybe looking at specific standards to help, you know, give better feedback or those type of things. And that's when I go to my principal at the time or my administrative colleagues and look for those type of things. Reached out to do some PD, but that was one thing that I felt was very eye-opening for all of us admin, is to see that comparable data and really kind of put things in perspective as well.
Okay, so every district has to submit their evaluation rankings to ADE, and in theory, the goal is to be effective. So if somebody gets rated highly effective on any of those performance standards, it means they're exceptional. And so, I mean, I even got a phone call from somebody that commented that when they looked at Higley's data, they thought we looked very consistent. So I was like, oh, okay, that's good to know. But now that I've transitioned over here to the district, I have sat with some administrators and gone through what they've written in their evaluations and discussed. It all goes back to being deliberate and specific and being objective. Because I don't need to say, oh, Rachel, you're a great person, you did a lovely job. Well, I didn't tell her anything. So we are working on that and looking at it.
One other question in reference to the presentation. At which point, I see we do the observation, okay, and then you have a conversation with the teacher. I don't see anything in here in reference that the teacher has the option for a written rebuttal in reference to this. And is it somewhere, because it's not in this presentation, that the teacher, if I'm showing things that are listed and the teacher doesn't feel that, hey, you marked me off on this, I want this to go into my file to show that, hey, I'm meeting this, maybe perhaps, particularly like the CTE, if they're not aware of that, there's some things in that. So is there something, because I didn't see it this evening.
So I didn't put it here, but yes, at the end, once they're done with the summative, and I'm sure my colleagues can talk to it more, but they have the opportunity to provide employee statement. And you know, there's language that talks about you don't have to agree with the evaluation, you're just acknowledging that you received it and you got the information and you understand it. But I've definitely had employees, I can only speak obviously to my experience this past academic year, but have had a couple of employees who have made comments and have added that to their file, and we attach it to that in that bigger picture. And I don't know if you want to comment anymore, but there's the opportunity for them to do that.
And is it just a statement, or is it like an appeal process too?
Well, according to legislation, there is an appeal process, and we also have it in our policy. So they can act upon that if they want to also. But that has not happened in my 1 year. I don't know if anybody else can speak to that, if it's happened before in the past. But they could provide a statement or they could appeal. It depends on what they want to do.
And I was just going to follow up on what Mr. Witovich said, that it is concerning, and I get it. There's a lot of people, and it could be that we just don't have a person, you know, our personalities clash or this and that, and that's why having documentation, specific documentation, is really important. But when I hear in an evaluation that an AP sits back and says, so tell me why you think you're highly effective, because you're not, is a problem. That's an issue. That's my concern with training. Are these people trained to evaluate people? Because that's not how you talk to anybody. That's not how an evaluator is. That may be how you may talk to them on the side, you know, just kind of joking around, so you think you're highly effective. You know, that is not a formal process, and inappropriate comment.
Absolutely.
And more than one. So the other thing, though, kind of following up on Mr. Witovich, is, well, one, not understanding content that's being taught, but two is, and Mr. Thornock, this rebuttal process, perhaps you like your admin and you work okay with them. There's still that fear of retaliation, and obviously nobody wants to be like, oh, I'm getting them in trouble, but they should have a process to be able to go to that's comfortable and say, I don't understand why I'm rated this way. And so how can we make that process better? I mean, is it something that they can do a statement to you?
Certainly.
Obviously, everyone has a different opinion on, I think I do my job great. And, you know, and you're subjective yourself, but everyone has that opinion. But when there's potentially some gross negligence, and when there's no oversight on the observers and the evaluators, then what?
I just want to add on to that. Studies show with this new generation coming on board in reference to the millenniums want to be part of the conversation in reference to their work. They want to, in reference to the decision-making process, in reference to evaluations, and that's, if not, they'll leave us. And that's the thing, is that they show the studies, the millenniums do not leave their workplace because of the corporation, it's because of their immediate supervisor and the working conditions at that particular site. And the first part of the site is the communication that you have with your supervisor, and in reference to the conversation that you can respond to any questions. And for one or two people responding, I'm just a little uncomfortable with that everyone should know that they have the opportunity, if I need to improve here, no, I don't agree with this, and this is in my file, so when I pull the file, I see that. If I see wonderful things that are happening over at HTA, or in reference to, at the beginning of the year, the teachers have an idea of as far as what the evaluation is going to take place, why aren't we duplicating something wonderful like what she's doing across our district to all our schools? So that's some of the questions or concerns that I have in reference to this.
Sure, and I'm taking notes. I mean, I guess my immediate reaction would be that, I'm disappointed to hear if individuals have treated other employees that way. Going back to our keynote speaker this morning and his comment about, treating people like you want to be treated and having those conversations, and you can still have ownership and accountability, but do it in a respectful manner. I know one of the things that we did at our administrator retreat that Dr. Malawine talked about was building this culture. And I know that we've been shifting in the time period that I've been here to try to build this culture of trust and communication. A term that I use a lot through bargaining is assume good intent, and I've had to use that here. And so what I hope might happen, because I certainly understand and know that people have that fear of retaliation, what I've been trying to communicate is that, no, that's illegal. Come, people are still going to decide to do what they want to do, right, in the bigger picture, but please come bring those concerns, and I'll work with the appropriate colleague and administrator to find out how we address that in that bigger picture. Because it is about having the hard conversations, but having respectful conversations. And going back to your comment, Mr. Witovich, in terms of getting people to stay, because it's in, once you gain that respect, that trust, people will stay and they'll know that, you know, it might be tough, but at least I get, and I'm treated with respect and I get the information that I need to, it's constructive for me to work better and move forward in that bigger picture, because that's what it's about. You can't change behavior if you don't know the behavior exists, right? So we'll have to think about that as a leadership team and figure out how we can continue to communicate that message, and how we do that to where maybe we've got people coming in and having those conversations, but going through the right channels in that process too. So then that way they're connecting with the right individuals in the bigger picture.
Well, and I think as board members, we hear a lot, and probably could speak for everyone up here. It's, please don't say anything. And so you're kind of caught between that rock and a hard place of, this isn't okay. I don't know, we also, I think, know that you take some information with a grain of salt, that it's not always as presented, and I think we know that. But, you know, it puts us in that spot when you're hearing these things of how evaluations are happening, or conversations that are happening in the evaluations, is it does put us in a difficult spot, because obviously you don't want to lose the trust of the people who are sharing information with you. And I think a lot of us share information as general as we can to say, hey, we might want to look at this. Just saying, you might want to look at this, you know. So, but I think maybe having some type of process where they can request maybe a district evaluator to come in. So if in their evaluation they really feel, I don't know that this is the true view of my performance, is it possible that I request an independent evaluator come in from the district office? It can be unannounced, they can show up and they can evaluate and then kind of compare. And yes, we do have some performance issues. And again, it's not to say the other evaluator's wrong. Perhaps they need some more training. Maybe they didn't understand a piece. Maybe just from going through it, they need a refresher. So it's not to point out that anyone was wrong, like you evaluated incorrectly. You need some retraining on this. So maybe a process like that they can, if they feel the need, they can do their statement, but maybe ask for someone outside to come in and do another performance evaluation. Doesn't mean, however, it's going to count, but at least it can provide some, like you had said, you know, bring someone, have your other administrator do it, or someone might not be comfortable with that, but having someone from the district office come and say, yep, you're not performing very well, and this information is here, and how can we help you, can be helpful.
Can I jump in? There has been some of that, where there's been some direct conversations with not only employees but administrators, trying to get all of us on the same page. So I have to be really general too, but you know, some of that is going on, but I think it goes back to this culture piece that we're really focusing on, because people have to feel safe and feel comfortable asking for support like that. Okay, good.
President Reese, members of the board, I would also like to say too, we have an incredible relationship with our Higley Education Association. So our Teachers Association also is utilized in those events where there might be some concerns too. And so we bring those in and work with our teachers and work with our administrators in that aspect too. It's just a really good process we have, and common goals for our teachers with our administrators to help our teachers. We want everyone to be successful.
And another good reason to be a part of the HEA too, Dr. Thomason.
President Reese, I have a comment or question. This might be the negative Nelly part of this morning, but I just keep remembering that little face that he inverted. And so obviously we do get teacher complaints from parents. What do we do with those if there's multiple issues with a teacher throughout a year from a parent or multiple parents? Are those being documented in a file? Are they part of this evaluation? And same goes then for the compliments, because I know we have that part too. So just putting that perspective, how does that play into evaluating a teacher, if at all?
I hope those individuals are directed to go, those parents are directed to go to those administrators, because if I'm the principal and I don't know about something, I can't address it. So to answer your question, everything's big picture. So we're the coach of those teachers, and it's our job to help them understand if they've made a mistake or need more training. So yeah, I mean, everything's part of the picture, but everything's about improvement or support, you know? But if there's a true problem, then it's on us too. We have to address it.
Yeah, I know I can't speak towards this directly, but I would encourage, and I know that we do get some of that feedback, whether it's from parents or from other members of the community, et cetera. And I know, going back to what Sherry said and what we said earlier, you can't correct behavior you don't know. So, you know, to some degree, like sometimes I'll have employees tell me X, Y, and Z employee did this or that. I said, well, did you talk to them about it? No. Well, okay, well, if we don't address it with them first, then we're not going to expect any change, right? So the first step is that. So I hope you'll encourage all of those individuals to come back to us, and so that way we as administrators and the leadership team can address that. And it's when we have those conversations and we don't see correction behavior, either way, then that's when we'll have to move forward with whatever process there needs to be in the big picture.
So I'm going to try to squint and read all the scribbles that I have here, but this strategic plan for everybody really provides a nice framework to have these important discussions that sometimes don't always take place in school districts. I love Goal 2. I'm glad you're focused on Goal 2, the teaching and learning environment. Teacher evaluations are, as we can all sense, they're emotional, they're important, but and I'm constantly impressed by how quickly you've grasped the culture here in Higley and the things going on in Higley. It's a credit to the work that you're doing. We've talking about what is currently and also what could be. And it sounds like this group and everybody that's been working for Higley for so long has identified some of the challenges, and that you all have some good ideas to improve, like sounds like Standard 7, maybe some balance there. If there's an appeals process that's needed. So I look forward to the work of making something that works well for the admins and doesn't unduly overburden them. I mean, I've seen that in my career. It can do that and provides teachers the opportunity for feedback and improvement in a timely manner, or the praise that they've earned. So I just thank you for sharing and the work, and I think this is really beneficial and a good dialogue.
President Reese, members of the board, I also wanted to address those opportunities that we get for compliments for our staff and our teachers. We do get those quite regularly. And what we do on those, if they're a written compliment or a written idea from one of our staff members or a community tonight, we do put those on a card, and we do deliver those to those teachers individually, and they get those on a regular basis. As a matter of fact, I probably have a stack of about 20 on my desk right now. I write them a personalized note, and we deliver it to their school for them. And we do get many, many, many more compliments than we do criticisms.
With that being said, I would just like to publicly say, since you have been here, you have done a remarkable job. You have made an imprint on this school district, and I just applaud you, and I thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you very much. I'm very humble. Thank you.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And we were talking about that culture, and that culture is changing. I don't know that, I mean, I think you can have a really good culture in a safe environment, and I don't know people are still comfortable questioning their superior, you know. So as far as our culture, we've made tremendous strides, And a lot of that, I mean, obviously, Dr. Thomas, and a lot of that goes to you, that safe part, that comfortability part. And like I said, it's never easy to question your supervisor. And a lot of the comments that I've heard, these teachers truly like their administrators, and they get along with them just fine. That evaluation piece, like, brings out a monster, you know? And so you can have a disagreement because you're talking about potential pay, you're talking about pride in your work, you don't want to hear you're doing something wrong and everything. So so I think just in general, as your committee talks about where we want to go and how we can create that maybe a little safer channel, we always, I think when we hear this, we're like, well, did you talk to your administrator? Because that's the first thing we say. You need to talk to your administrator. If you disagree with it, professionally sit down and have a conversation. It's hard to leave emotion out of that because it is very personal and emotional, but we refer them back to the administrator. You need to talk to your principal and have that conversation and try and remove ourselves out. But you know, once we've heard something, it's like that just doesn't go away, assuming that they're going to take care of it. So, and same with parents, when we get those complaints, you need to talk to your teacher, you need to talk to your principal. If there's an issue, you need to take it back to your site and someone will help you. So, same with compliments. We hear a ton of compliments in the community. Did you let the principal know? You know, so it's share that too. So thank you for the presentation. I think it's a better understanding. I think it is timely, like Mr. Glover said, as we're continuing to work through our strategic plan, that we have recognized that maybe it may not be, but we have challenges utilizing this tool. What can we do to fix those? So I think that's part of that different culture in Higley is that, so it's not great. You know, we're going, hey, now we're going to take a look at it and we're going to listen to the voices of the people it affects and include them on solutions. So thank you very much for that.
Absolutely.
Sorry, one last thing that I had in my scribbles that I was turned sideways, but you know, we were talking about consistency, and one of the things that helps that is the stability that we've started to see in our administrators, and that's a credit to the good work that everybody's doing. I can't even read what I see our principals getting stronger every year, and I mean, I'm not out there like anybody is, but just having been there for a year and watching them grow, all these things will contribute to a stronger, better Higley.
Thank you, and just a big thank you to my colleagues too. I couldn't have done this without them. So thank you very much.
All right. That's all we have, so I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 5-0. Have a good evening.